Alright, welcome back, people. It's Bare Bones Talk time here. So, wow, we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. A lot of it revolving around the fact that it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and also a major gun rally happened today. Gotta say, not impressed with the gun owners in Virginia for most of what they did today. I am very grateful that they did not get violent while at the Capitol, so they got that going for them. But we're going to get into that in a little more detail shortly. In the meantime, let's take a look at the news on the Associated Press site. I am also trying to get a chat box widget to work here. So I don't know if it's actually going to function or not. I am still in the testing phases. But if we manage to get it working, that'll be good. That way we'll have chat messages show up on screen, because that would be a bonus. Also, unrelated to anything in the news, this channel got offered affiliate status yesterday night, and I believe I have put everything together correctly. So the channel is now eligible for subs, bits, all that kind of happy, fun stuff. And I will have to start working on putting together some emojis for the group. So, yeah, fantastico. Anyway, let's dig into the news. Shall we? I think we shall. All right. McConnell proposes swift impeachment trial with long days. If there's anybody in the United States that is surprised that McConnell wants to try to shortcut the entire justice process, you have probably had your head in the sand, or been living under a rock, or been living under a rock with your head in the sand, because that is such a typical thing for the Republican Party to do. On the eve of President Donald Trump's impeachment trial, the Senate leader proposed a compressed calendar for opening statements. White House lawyers argued for swift rejection of the, quote, flimsy, unquote, charges, and the Capitol braced for the contentious proceedings unfolding in an election year. Okay, so calling the charges flimsy is just defense lawyer bullshit. The charges are anything but flimsy. Trump is so blatantly guilty that only the fact that the Senate is majority held by Republicans gives him the chance to be acquitted. Otherwise, he would be guaranteed to be convicted based on the strength of the evidence. But they have to say that the charges are flimsy because it's his defense team, and they can't just say, "Yep, the evidence all says he's screwed," because that's not what defense lawyers do. Let's see. Final trial preparations were underway Monday on a tense day of plotting developments with Trump's legacy and the judgment of both parties in Congress at stake. The president's legal team, in its first full say that 10 times fast, first full filing for the impeachment court, argued that Trump did, quote, absolutely nothing wrong, unquote, and urged the Senate to swiftly reject the, quote, flawed, unquote, case against him. And again, that's just more defense lawyer bullshit. Right? Okay, enough of that. All of this is a dangerous perversion of the Constitution that the Senate should swiftly and roundly condemn, the president's lawyers wrote. The articles should be rejected and the president should be immediately acquitted. Again, utter bullshit, just defense lawyer crap. Anybody telling you that this is a perversion of the Constitution does not understand what the Constitution says. The Constitution requires a fair and impartial hearing be given to the president who stands impeached. Not we're just going to acquit him, because that's not a fair and impartial way of treating anything. The brief from the White House and the House Democratic response comes as the Senate could be facing 12-hour sessions for the rare Senate trial, with some of the very senators running to replace Trump as president sitting as jurors. Okay, so here's another thing to keep in mind here. By trying to make this happen in an abridged way and forcing people to stay late and have long, tiring days, it's a move by McConnell to try to make the prosecution have a hard time presenting its case. It is anything but following the constitutional requirement that the president receive a fair and impartial trial. It is absolutely partisan as hell for him to be saying that. Senate Majority Leader McConnell proposed a condensed 2-day calendar for each side to give opening statements, ground rules that Democrats immediately rejected, as well they should, because that's just bullshit. Opening statements in a trial take as long as they take. You don't get to just say we're cutting you off after X period of time. It's not the way this needs to work. Voting on the Republican leader's resolution will be one of the first orders of business when senators convene Tuesday. It also pushes off any votes on witnesses until later in the process rather than up front as Democrats had demanded. That is a reaction to the revelations of Lev Parnas, who basically just spilled the beans that Trump absolutely was involved, knew everything, is neck deep in fucking guilt. And they're trying very hard to make sure that Parnas's testimony never gets admitted into the case. Not because they want a fair and impartial trial, but because they know it would immediately prove Trump's guilt. And they don't care about actually having an honest trial. All the Republicans care about is acquitting their guy, no matter how guilty he actually is. The Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, called the GOP leader's proposed rules package a, quote, national disgrace, which is a very accurate way to describe it. Senators are poised for only the third presidential impeachment trial in U.S. history, coming just weeks before the first primaries of the 2020 election season, and as voters are assessing Trump's first term and weighing the candidates who want to challenge him in the fall. House Democrats impeached the president last month on 2 charges. Abuse of power by withholding U.S. military aid to Ukraine as he pressed the country to investigate Democratic rival Joe Biden, which, again, Lev Parnas makes clear he absolutely did, absolutely knew about. There was no, ooh, Trump didn't know what was going on. There was no, ooh, Trump didn't order it. Trump is absolutely guilty as a fucking fox in a henhouse. Where was I? And obstruction of Congress by refusing to comply with their investigation. Again, just because you're the president doesn't mean you get to give the middle finger to subpoenas and, court orders and such like that. Trump thinks he's allowed to, and his refusal to comply with the legally required process for this means he is guilty of obstruction of Congress. The Constitution gives the House the sole power to impeach a president and the Senate the final verdict by convening the impeachment court for a trial. McConnell is angling for a speedy trial toward acquittal, and with Republicans holding the Senate majority, the proposal is likely to be approved by senators in the president's party, because again, McConnell already said he plans to coordinate with the defense. Try to imagine for a moment here that you're talking about a criminal trial that's not involving the president, and the jurors all get together and say, we're going to take all our cues from the defense team. We don't care what the prosecutor has to say. We don't care what the facts are. We're just going to acquit based on what the defense attorney says. That's exactly what's happening here in Congress. And honestly, any Republican senator who goes along with this kind of thing should be charged and jailed, honestly, for whatever you call the crime of intentionally interfering with the legal process of a trial. I mean, maybe that's another form of obstruction of Congress. I'm not sure. I'm not an attorney, but not acceptable. It's clear Senator McConnell is hell-bent on making it much more difficult to get witnesses and documents and intent on rushing the trial through, Schumer said. He vowed to propose votes Tuesday to try and to amend the rules package. He called it a cover-up, and that just goes to show that Schumer is absolutely correct. The first several days of the trial are now almost certain to be tangled in procedural motions playing out on the Senate floor, or more likely behind closed doors, since senators must refrain from speaking during the trial proceedings. At the White House, where the president was embarking for an overseas trip to the Global Leaders Conference in Davos, Switzerland, officials welcomed the Republican trial proposal. Meaning, of course, Trump is going to be like, hell yeah, I love the idea of just getting this shit over with and just acquitting me without having an actual trial. Because, Trump's a scumbag and guilty as hell, and of course he's going to say that. Hello, welcome. What is my opinion on gun ownership? We'll get to that after we take care of this article. But broadly speaking, I believe that within legal limits, it should be okay to own firearms. where I differ with a lot of people on the Second Amendment, like bandwagon, is what I think constitutes reasonable limits. But we can have I would be welcoming for a discussion about that as soon as we get done with this article. Because there's a lot to unpack about gun stuff today, especially with the rally that happened in Virginia this morning. Where was I? We are gratified that the draft. By the way, welcome. I'm not sure how to. Is your name Mick Yeater Boy? Is that how you say it? I want to get your name right because, I try to be respectful of people's names. We are gratified that the draft resolution protects the president's rights to a fair trial and look forward to presenting a vigorous defense on the facts and the process as quickly as possible and seeking an acquittal as swiftly as possible, said White House Legislative Affairs Director Eric Ueland. And of course he is, because, he doesn't want a long, drawn-out trial where actual witnesses with actual evidence, get entered into the record, because Trump is so guilty that he ought to be, struggling to contain the blackened soul that's, contained within that giant orange shell. And the only way that he's getting acquitted without there being a national uproar is if the trial does not include actual evidence and witnesses like Lev Parnas, who just appeared with all the smoking gun info that is, could remotely ever be wanted to prove Trump's absolute complicity? Yeah, with the crimes that he's accused of. After the 4 days of opening arguments, 2 days per side. I love how this article assumes that motion is going to pass. Senators will be allowed up to 16 hours for questions to the prosecution and defense, followed by 4 hours of debate. Only then will there be votes calling other witnesses. But just call me Joshua. Okay, Joshua, welcome. At the end of deliberations, the Senate would then vote on each impeachment article. McConnell had promised to set rules similar to those of the last trial for Clinton in '99, but his resolution diverged in key ways, which leaves some senators from both parties uneasy. There is absolutely no reason why the pattern should have been followed from the Clinton administration trial, for a bunch of reasons, but the simplest of them is Clinton's impeachment concern was he got a consensual blowjob in the Oval Office. There was no national concern or security concern. There was no abuse of power. There was no obstruction of Congress. So it's a completely different scale of stuff. And saying that the same procedural rules should be applied to Trump's charges is just ludicrous. And it's a move clearly designed to try to prevent there from being a thorough trial. Let's see. Romney said in an email message that the resolution put forth by McConnell overall aligns closely with the rules package approved 100-0 during the Clinton trial, which of course it does, mirror it, but again, it's not appropriate for it to mirror the Clinton rules. He's among a small number of Republican senators who want to consider witness testimony and documents that weren't part of the House impeachment investigation. With security tightening at the Capitol, the House prosecutors, led by Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, made their way through crowds of tourists in the rotunda to tour the Senate chamber. The White House legal team, led by Pat Cipollone, and Jay Sekulow, soon followed. Both sides were under instructions to keep the chamber doors closed and to onlookers and the media. So I guess they're trying to keep the number of cameras in there to a minimum. 4 TV monitors were set up inside the Senate chamber, which will be used to show testimony, exhibits, and potentially tweets or other social media, according to a person familiar with the matter but unauthorized to discuss it, who spoke on condition of anonymity. Thank goodness for whistleblowers, man. In their own filing Monday, House prosecutors issued fresh demands for a fair trial in the Senate. President Trump asserts that his impeachment is a partisan hoax. He is wrong, the prosecutors wrote. That is completely true. This is not a hoax. The charges against him are very serious, and they are backed up by a shit ton of evidence. There is no reason to dismiss this as a hoax, unless, you're a dishonest fuck who just wants to get away with crimes like, I don't know, Trump, The House Democrats said the president can't have it both ways, rejecting the facts of the case, but also stonewalling congressional subpoenas for witnesses and testimony. Senators must honor their own oaths by holding a fair trial with all relevant evidence, and that's true. Senators all have to swear an oath of office, and the shit that McConnell and the Republicans in Senate are pulling right now directly violates their oath to uphold the Constitution. I mean, based on their own package of projected rules, they should all be removed from office if they vote for it, because it will be a direct contravention of the oath they swore. The White House document released Monday says the 2 charges against the president don't amount to impeachable offenses. That's bullshit. Abuse of power and obstruction of Congress are absolutely impeachable offenses. It asserts that the impeachment inquiry centered on Trump's request that Ukraine's president open an investigation into Democratic rival Biden was never about finding the truth. House Democrats in their initial court filing over the weekend called Trump's conduct the worst nightmare of the framers of the Constitution. And I would have to agree with that. The founding fathers of this country, if they were confronted with a president like Trump, they would have all been loading their muskets again and fucking killed him by now. I mean, that's, these are people who literally killed their way to a free country, and they would not put up with the kind of shit that Trump is doing, and they certainly would have shot the living crap out of McConnell by now. They did not accept that kind of behavior in the least, and were very quick to load their muskets. Welcome, Uwu Master. Let's see. Trump used his official powers to pressure a foreign government to interfere in a United States election for his personal political gain, the prosecutors wrote, and then attempted to cover up his scheme by obstructing Congress's investigation into his misconduct. That seems like a completely accurate description of events. Cloby? Is that how you want me to say it? Trump's team contended Monday that even if Trump were to have abused his power, it would not be impeachable because it did not violate a specific criminal statute. That's irrelevant, and that's not how constitutional law works. Impeachment is not about violating criminal law. It's not a criminal court. It's about meeting the standard of what the founders described as high crimes and misdemeanors, which absolutely includes obstruction of Congress and abuse of power. In fact, if I remember correctly, abuse of power was one of the things Jefferson specifically wrote about in his notes about what was included in the Constitution as one of the high crimes and misdemeanors. No president has ever been removed by the Senate. The current Senate, with a 53-47 Republican majority, is not expected to mount the 2/3 vote needed for conviction. Even if it did, the White House team argues it would be an unconstitutional conviction because the articles of impeachment were too broad. And this should terrify anybody, including Republicans, the same way it should have terrified them, and they should have immediately ditched voting for Trump as even a possibility in 2016. For the same reason, because Trump in 2016 said that if the vote didn't go his way, he might not be willing to accept it, and that if the vote didn't go his way in 2020, he might not willingly step down. And those are the kind of things that a dictator says, not a president. Same thing here. If Congress actually convicts him, which we all know is very unlikely because the Senate is comprised of 53% Republicans who have no intention of mounting a fair trial. They've literally already said they're working with the defense team. But if he were convicted, the fact that he's willing to say that he would ignore the ruling of Congress should fucking terrify you guys. Your own guy is willing to say he's going to make himself dictator, and even if he's ordered to be removed from office, that he won't go. Imagine how you would feel if that had been like the most far left, Democrat president saying that, and then that's the level of horror you should feel. Administration officials have argued that similar imprecision applied to the perjury case in Clinton's impeachment trial. Again, not a matter of precision. The White House also, because the fact is, when we're talking about the Trump thing here, the evidence is absolutely on point, so there's no question of its being precise in this case. The White House also suggests the House inquiry was lacking because it failed to investigate Biden or his son Hunter, who served on the board of a gas company in Ukraine while his father was vice president. There is no evidence of wrongdoing by either Biden. I got news for you. Even if the Bidens are guilty as shit, it is irrelevant to the Trump trial because it doesn't matter whether they were guilty or innocent or not. You don't tell a foreign leader that you're going to basically blackmail them by withholding aid unless they investigate a political rival. Trump's actions are criminal regardless of whether or not the Bidens did anything wrong as well. And if they did, I hope the Bidens get, caught and punished for their crimes. Just as I hope any criminal gets caught and punished for their crimes. But it's not relevant to what Trump did. Trump blackmailed a foreign national leader, for political gain. And that's what he's being brought up on impeachment charges for. So, I was going to do the entire news wrap-up thing tonight to start the stream, but Joshua, also known as Mick Yeaterboy, asked me what my opinion is on gun ownership, so we're going to delve into that for the moment. My opinion on gun ownership is that within the bounds of the law, that it should be acceptable to own firearms. But there should be some consistent set of rules for it on a national scale. One thing that you hear from gun rights activists very frequently is that there are already many, many, many gun control laws on the books, and that has not stopped crime, etc., etc., etc. The problem isn't that there are too many gun control laws on the books. The problem is that we have this mishmash of laws that vary state to state to state, and town to town to town within a state that actually create some of the problems with gun ownership in this country. And one example of that is what's called straw purchasing. Are either of you who are here, who are in the chat, familiar with what straw purchasing is? If not, I'll give you a short rundown. And you'll be able to tell pretty quickly why that's the result of having inconsistent laws across, state and city boundaries. Okay. So straw purchasing is when a person wants a gun and they get somebody but they can't get one on their own, right? Maybe they live someplace where the gun control laws are very strict. So they talk to somebody who lives in a more permissive area and they say what amounts to, hey, I'll pay you a certain amount of money if you go buy a gun for me and bring it back, okay? That's called straw purchasing, because the person who's actually making the purchase doesn't intend to own the gun for themselves. They purchase it with the express intent to give it to someone else who couldn't legally get their hands on a gun, and then they usually do something like report the gun stolen, etc., and pocket the money that the straw purchaser guy, offered them to make the deal. So that only happens because the laws vary across state and city borders, okay? I live in New Hampshire, which is a state where it's very easy to buy a gun, and there are states near us where it is much harder to buy a gun, and there are gun dealers that literally are built on the border with Massachusetts, for example, on major roads, just so that it's easy for people to come in from out of state with their friends, right? And make a purchase and go back across the border. Like they build these gun shops in places where, the ability for New Hampshire residents to get to them is harder, but they're super easy to access for people in Massachusetts, which means, the straw purchaser guy comes up from Massachusetts, waits in the parking lot for his friend or, illegal associate to go into the shop and buy the guns, and they bring them out, throw them in the guy's trunk, and money changes hands, and they all drive away. Yes, it's illegal. That's my point. But if we had unified gun laws across the country, we would need, number one, a large amount fewer of them than we have now. And number two, you wouldn't be able to do the straw purchasing thing because you wouldn't be able to, for example, step across the border from Massachusetts to New Hampshire and suddenly be in a place where it's easy to buy a gun, right? And then step back across the border where it's illegal, having gotten a gun you shouldn't, by your own state's laws, be able to acquire. That's one of the problems we have with, guns in this country. Which is also the reason why the gun advocate thing where they say, oh, well, Chicago has the strictest gun laws, blah, 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 and the crime rate there, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but the cities around Chicago are virtually free of gun control laws, which is why the city is drowning in guns, because you literally just have to drive to a suburb of Chicago, and you can buy an arsenal in about 5 minutes, and then just drive home with it. There's no there's no preventing it from happening. So if we had unified gun laws across the entire nation, it would put an end to straw purchasing. So, you combine that with a universal background check program so that if somebody's a felon, they can't just go across a border and buy a gun. They can't just pay somebody from across a border to get one that they wouldn't be able to get because there would be no state where, the person's record of straw purchasing wouldn't immediately flag them and keep them from buying guns for other people. And it would cut down on the flow of guns into the hands of criminals, because what a lot of people who are Second Amendment fans don't really think about is they spend a lot of time thinking about how dangerous an armed criminal population is, but they don't spend a lot of time thinking about how the reality is that most of the guns that find their way into the hands of criminals get there having been purchased legally by people who can legally buy guns. One of the biggest eye-opening things for me was when I read a report that was done in New Jersey. Excuse me, having a sip of my beverage here. Where I forget the organization that did it, but they went to the Rahway State Penitentiary, where the hardest of the hardcore criminals in the area were housed. And they offered incentives, like sentencing incentives, to people who were professional burglars, professional home invaders, etc., if they would help with an investigation into what motivates them, right? Specifically, what makes them select a certain house to rob, and what makes them go elsewhere, what makes them say that house is a bad candidate for robbery, okay? Yeah, so it's like you said, in Minnesota, it's very easy to get your hands on a gun. So the net result, and by the way, thank you very much for the follow. Although since you're obviously trolling with that name, you can leave anytime you want. I don't really need followers like that. The number one thing, by the way, if you want to keep your home safe, the most effective thing, the thing that deters home invaders and burglars the most, and I mean the real hardcore criminals, number one on the list, barking dog. Okay? And when asked why, the very insightful response from these people amounted to, you can menace a homeowner with a knife or a gun or any kind of weapon, but if a dog is coming at you, it's coming at you. You can't argue with it. You can't scare it away. It's going to come and try to kill you. And that's just not worth their time. The really fascinating thing, though, was the number one thing that makes burglars want to target a home was the knowledge that there are guns in the house, which is very counterintuitive. But what it comes down to is the real hardcore criminals know that those are prime targets for two reasons. Number one, they don't have to worry about the homeowner because they case the properties that they're going to rob, and they know when you're not home, and they simply go in when you're not there. And number two, because there's such a high demand among the criminal element for guns, they're very easy to unload on the black market. So having it known that you have guns in your home actually makes you a target for burglary, which I would not have thought until I actually saw it from the mouths of the people that actually commit these crimes. So it's an interesting thing there, which is why I say that there are a lot of people who buy guns for reasons they think are helpful, but are not really doing themselves the most favors. Because if you really want to protect your home, you're going to actually be much more successful at getting a really loud dog than you will by getting a firearm. It's not incorrect. It's actually a report you can read. You can look it up yourself from the Rahway State Penitentiary about the motives of burglars and home invaders. It's from their own mouths. Statistics say you are more likely to get stabbed by a knife. You're talking about that. If you're good, okay. So first of all, I'm actually going. Since this is obviously not your real name, Mr. PP, I'm going to ban you. Okay, and you can come back with an actual name where you're not being a dick with the name, and then we can have just a nice conversation. But if you're going to show up with a name like that, you get banned. So just letting you know that that's going to be the outcome here, because you've decided you want to be kind of a punk. So I never feel good about doing that, but you're going to have to be banned if you don't just leave and change your name. So I leave it to you to decide whether you want to, actually do it yourself or whether you want me to kick you. So up to you. Because I'm more than willing to have a conversation with you, but not if you're going to show up here with that name. Okay, hang on a second. I'm having a little technical issue here. I'm going to have to restart the stream. Don't go away. I'll be right back.